The sun was low on the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the dense forest. Trees of strange, towering shapes whispered in the wind, their leaves rustling with a soft hum that seemed almost alive. The planet, a small distant world at the edge of the galaxy, had always been known as a quiet place, far from the hustle and bustle of the larger, more populated systems. On this planet, there was little to fear. At least, that's what humanity had always believed. It was a place where explorers could come, study the natural life, and be safe from the chaos of the galaxy. But on this day, everything was about to change. A lone figure moved silently through the forest, the crunch of his boots on the dry leaves the only sound that broke the stillness. He was a soldier, human, but not the kind you would find in most human settlements. His name was Captain Adam Ward, and he had been sent to this world for a simple mission: study the planet's ecosystem, gather data on its wildlife, and report back to the Galactic Council. At first glance, this seemed like any other routine task. There were no signs of danger, no hostile creatures lurking in the shadows. But Adam's instincts were honed over years of training. The air was different here. It was thick, heavy with something he couldn't quite explain. A strange energy that didn't quite fit with the quiet beauty of the planet. He stopped for a moment, his hand brushing against the bark of a tree. The surface was smooth and cool to the touch, unlike anything he had felt before. His sensors picked up faint energy readings, far off in the distance. He could barely make it out. Whatever it was small, moving fast, and unlike any life form the Council had cataloged before. Curiosity got the better of him. Adam crouched down, adjusting his equipment, trying to get a better reading. Whatever was moving through the underbrush was quick, fast, too fast for something that should be native to this world. He stood slowly, ready to move forward, when something caught his eye. There, through the trees, a flash of movement. At first, it was just a blur, but as he focused, the figure became clearer. They were creatures, small and vulnerable, huddled together in a dense patch of ferns. Adam's heart skipped a beat. The creatures before him were unlike anything he had ever seen. They resembled the young of certain species he had encountered, but their features were alien, bizarre, and beautiful all at once. Their skin was a soft, translucent green, almost glowing in the dim light. They had large, expressive eyes, wide and innocent, and were completely defenseless. And most surprising of all, there were no adults around. Adam crouched down to get a better look, his hands instinctively reaching for his comms device. The rest of the team needed to know about this discovery. But as his fingers hovered over the controls, something made him pause. These creatures were different. They were not like the wild animals he had seen before. These were something more. One of the cubs, as he now realized they must be, turned its head and looked right at him. Its gaze was curious but unafraid. There was a kind of trust in its eyes, an innocent trust that Adam wasn't used to seeing in the wild. It was as though it knew he wasn't a threat. A strange feeling washed over Adam as he stared back into the cub's eyes. He had seen many wild creatures in his time, but never had he seen one so vulnerable, so exposed, yet so calm in the face of a human presence. Something deep inside him stirred. The cub made a soft sound, a kind of cooing noise, and slowly it crept closer to him. Adam froze, unsure of what to do. He had been trained to observe, not to interact with alien creatures, especially not ones that seemed to trust him. But the cub's actions were too innocent to ignore. He gently extended his hand toward it. For a moment, he thought it might run away, but instead, it approached cautiously, its tiny feet making no sound on the forest floor. Then, with a tentative motion, it nuzzled against his palm. Adam's breath caught in his throat. What was this? It was as though the creature knew that he meant no harm, that it could trust him. But before he could process what was happening, another cub moved closer. Then another. Soon, The small group was at his feet, looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Adam knelt down, keeping his movements slow and calm, not wanting to startle them. For a brief moment, the world felt still. He was surrounded by these creatures, their eyes full of curiosity, their movements gentle. For the first time in a long time, Adam felt something close to peace. But deep down, he knew this moment wouldn't last. He had no idea what these creatures were, why they were here, or what danger might be lurking nearby. The peaceful moment shattered when a sudden noise broke the silence. A low growl echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable sounds of something heavy moving through the underbrush. Adam stood up quickly, instinctively drawing his weapon. His sensors went wild, alerting him to multiple heat signatures approaching fast. This wasn't just a peaceful encounter, it was a trap. The creatures at his feet scattered, their cries echoing in the quiet forest. Adam's heart raced. He wasn't sure who or what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain. This was no ordinary wildlife encounter. Something much bigger was at play here. And it was up to him to protect these innocent cubs, no matter the cost. Adam's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the forest around him. The growl had come from deep within the trees, but the sound echoed eerily, bouncing off the thick trunks and branches, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. His fingers tightened around the handle of his weapon, his every instinct screaming to remain calm. But the growing tension in the air made it nearly impossible to think straight. The cubs had scattered. The once peaceful creatures that had nuzzled against his hand were now nowhere to be seen. In the distance, Adam heard a rustling sound, too controlled to be a wild animal. Someone, or something, was moving deliberately toward him. He took a slow step back, his boots crunching against the dry underbrush, the sound jarring in the otherwise hushed forest. Every muscle in his body was on high alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger, far more dangerous, was about to make its appearance. His sensors beeped urgently, and his helmet's visor flickered to life with a readout of the surrounding area. Several heat signatures were moving fast through the dense foliage, more than he had expected, and they were closing in. It wasn't just one or two threats. No, this was a coordinated force, and they weren't human. A shadow flitted across the edge of his vision, and Adam spun around, his weapon raised. But it was only a small animal, a harmless, furry creature that scurried across the ground. He lowered his weapon with a sigh of relief, but didn't allow himself to relax completely. Something was coming, and it wasn't that harmless creature. Then he heard it again, the growl. But this time, it wasn't from one source. It was from several. Deep, guttural, and menacing. Adam's breath caught in his throat. He knew that sound well. The growl was familiar, but not in a comforting way. It was the sound of predators closing in. Before Adam could react, the trees in front of him began to shake violently, and a massive creature crashed through the brush, moving with terrifying speed and strength. Its sleek, muscular body was covered in black scales that shimmered in the dim light, and its eyes, fierce and glowing, were locked onto him. The creature's mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and its growl shook the ground beneath Adam's feet. He didn't have time to aim properly. The creature lunged at him, its massive claws swiping through the air just inches from his face. Adam barely managed to sidestep, his heart racing as the beast's talons slashed through the air. He fired a few quick shots, but the bullets bounced off the creature's thick scales with no effect. In the distance, the sounds of more creatures approaching became louder. It wasn't just one of these beasts. It was a pack. Adam's training kicked in. His mind raced through the strategies he had learned over the years, fighting in hostile environments, battling hostile creatures, surviving against impossible odds. But this was different. He was on a planet that was supposed to be peaceful, surrounded by strange, alien creatures, and he was the one being hunted. He reached for his comms device, but just as his hand brushed it, another of the creatures leaped toward him. its claws sinking deep into the ground where he had been standing only moments before. His eyes widened in shock. They were fast, coordinated, and relentless. But there was something more. They were protecting something. They weren't here just to kill. They were here to guard. As the creatures closed in, Adam's mind raced. The cubs, the innocent, fragile creatures he had been trying to protect, were in the middle of this. No, Adam whispered under his breath. There was no time to lose. He had to act fast, and he had to act smart. The survival of these cubs, and possibly his own life, depended on it. With quick, calculated movements, Adam sprinted toward the edge of the forest, using his superior speed to maneuver around the attacking predators. His weapon was now a secondary concern. He needed to find the cubs, and he needed to protect them, before these creatures turned the entire forest into their hunting ground. The sound of the growls filled the air, but Adam pushed forward, the realization dawning on him that whatever these predators were, they were far more dangerous than he had ever expected. He didn't have the luxury of wondering why they were attacking, or where they had come from. The only thing that mattered now was survival. His training, his instincts, and the fate of those innocent cubs had to guide him through this nightmare. And he wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The cubs needed him. The forest had become a maze of shadows and danger. Adam's pulse pounded in his ears as he dashed between trees, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Every instinct screamed at him to keep moving, to keep ahead of the predators that seemed to be everywhere. The creatures were relentless, and they were getting closer. He could hear their growls grow louder, a chilling sound that made his heart skip a beat. He took a sharp turn around a large rock formation, his boots skidding slightly on the loose dirt. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of the cubs. Where had they gone? Were they still safe? His mind raced with the fear of what might happen if he couldn't find them in time. The creatures were closing in on him, their speed and agility unmatched. Adam barely had time to aim his weapon as another predator leaped toward him. This time, he was ready. His shot rang out, striking the creature in the side, but the impact barely slowed it down. It twisted in midair and crashed to the ground with a growl, but it was up again in an instant, its eyes locked onto him with pure malice. Damn it. Adam gritted his teeth, realizing that his weapon was not enough to take them down. He had to think faster, use the terrain to his advantage. Just as he turned to make another dash, he spotted movement in the distance, a flicker of motion between the trees. His heart leaped in his chest. It was them, the cubs. They were still alive. But they weren't alone. A massive predator, larger than the others, loomed over them, its muscular body rippling with strength. The cubs were huddled together in a corner, eyes wide with fear. The predator stood between them and Adam, its posture defensive, as though it was guarding them. Adam didn't hesitate. He raced toward them, his legs pumping faster as he moved with every ounce of speed he could muster. The larger predator growled, turning to face him, its teeth bared in a vicious snarl. No, Adam shouted, his voice filled with desperation. He couldn't let it kill the cubs. He couldn't let it hurt them. The creature lunged at him. And for a moment, everything slowed down. Adam's mind processed the move with shocking clarity, his survival instincts kicking into overdrive. He ducked just in time, the creature's claws missing him by inches. He spun around, using the momentum to bring his knee up and strike the predator in its vulnerable underbelly. The force of the blow sent the creature stumbling back, its growl turning into a pained screech. Adam didn't wait for the creature to recover. He surged forward, grabbing one of the cubs in each arm, feeling their tiny, trembling bodies against his chest. They were lighter than he had expected, but their weight wasn't what worried him. What mattered now was getting them to safety. With a roar, the predator recovered and lunged again, its sharp claws swiping through the air toward Adam's exposed back. But Adam was faster. He sidestepped, throwing himself to the side as the creature's claws scraped against the earth where he had been standing just moments before. He fired another shot, this time aiming for the predator's eyes. The shot rang out with a deafening crack, and the creature staggered backward, temporarily blinded. It howled in pain, giving Adam the moment he needed to make his escape. "Come on, come on," Adam urged the cubs, his voice low but urgent. He sprinted through the forest, weaving between trees, his body moving on pure instinct. The cubs clung to him, their tiny claws digging into his shoulders for support, but they remained silent, sensing the danger around them. The growls of the other predators echoed through the trees, a constant reminder of the threat pursuing them. But Adam couldn't stop. He had to keep running, had to get them to safety. He rounded a corner and stumbled into a clearing. He was nearly out of breath, his legs burning from the effort. But ahead, through the trees, he saw a structure, a large building partially hidden by overgrown vines. It wasn't much, but it was a shelter, and it was better than nothing. He raced toward the structure, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. The predators were still close behind, but Adam was determined. He would fight to the end if he had to. As he reached the entrance, he ducked inside and pulled the cubs in with him. He slammed the door shut, the heavy metal door groaning as it sealed off the entrance. He stood for a moment, panting heavily, his heart hammering in his chest. They had made it, for now, at least. But the fight wasn't over. The creatures would come for them. He had no doubt about that. But Adam wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The cubs had no one else to protect them, and he had sworn to do whatever it took to keep them safe. He would hold this ground, fight through the night, and if he had to, take down every predator that came for them. With a determined breath, he set the cubs down gently, looking into their eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, they were alive, and that was enough. For now, the battle had been won. But Adam knew that the real fight was just beginning. The shelter was cold, but it provided the safety Adam needed to regroup. The cubs, still trembling from the harrowing escape, nestled into the corners of the room. Their large, innocent eyes followed him as he paced nervously, weighing his options. The creatures outside were relentless, and he couldn't afford to underestimate them. They weren't just animals. They were a force of nature. He pressed his back against the cold wall, trying to steady his breath. He had to think clearly. Time was running out, and the predators would be back. He needed to come up with a plan, and he needed to do it fast. The cubs were vulnerable. Their species was not as durable as the larger predators, and they needed protection. Adam knew that his weapons and strength were their only chance, but even he couldn't hold off an entire pack for long. He had to take them somewhere safer, somewhere they could survive. Suddenly, a low guttural growl echoed from outside the shelter. Adam froze. It was close, too close. He dared not move, his eyes fixed on the door as he tried to assess the situation. The growl wasn't from one of the smaller predators. This was something different, something much larger. Without thinking, he rushed to the small window in the corner, barely wide enough for him to peek through. His eyes scanned the dense, shadowed forest, looking for any sign of movement. That's when he saw it. A massive, hulking figure moving slowly toward the shelter. The creature was unlike anything he had seen before. It had a sleek, muscular frame, dark scales that shimmered in the moonlight, and eyes that glowed with a vicious intelligence. Its teeth were as long as Adam's arm, sharp enough to rip through metal. This wasn't just another predator. It was the alpha of the pack, and it was hunting them. Adam's pulse quickened, and a cold sweat trickled down his neck. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was war. He backed away from the window, eyes locked on the cubs. They were oblivious to the danger lurking outside, their innocent curiosity making Adam's heart ache. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to be hunted down like this. He had to protect them. He had to do whatever it took. "Stay quiet," he whispered urgently to the cubs, his voice barely a murmur in the dark room. They instinctively crouched lower, sensing his fear. They trusted him, and that trust made the weight of his responsibility heavier. The growl outside grew louder. The Alpha was closer now, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Adam could feel the building tremble with each step it took. He was running out of time. He needed to make a decision. Now. Adam moved toward the far corner of the shelter, where he had stored his gear. He grabbed his rifle, checked the ammunition, and reloaded it with practiced speed. Then he grabbed the emergency survival pack and slung it over his shoulder, ensuring it was tightly secured. There was no turning back now. He had to fight. His eyes flicked to the cubs one more time. They were still watching him, their large eyes reflecting an understanding far beyond their age. They knew the danger was real, and they knew that he was the only thing standing between them and certain death. With a deep breath, Adam made his way to the shelter's exit. The moment he opened the door, the wind hit him, carrying with it the scent of the predator outside. He was no longer just fighting for survival. This was about saving the cubs, ensuring that they could live without the shadow of the predators looming over them. The Alpha was circling the shelter now, growling as it sniffed the air. It was trying to figure out how to get in. Adam knew that he couldn't keep hiding forever. He needed to take the fight to the Alpha before it took the fight to him. He stepped outside, his heart pounding in his chest. The night air was thick with tension, the forest eerily quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves. The Alpha was somewhere nearby, its glowing eyes scanning the darkness. Adam knew it was waiting for him to make the first move. But Adam had a different plan. He wasn't going to wait for the Alpha to attack. He was going to strike first. With a swift motion, he raised his rifle and fired a shot into the air. The sound echoed through the forest, a sharp, deafening crack that sent the creatures into a frenzy. The Alpha growled in response, the sound low and menacing as it turned toward Adam's position. It was time. Adam sprinted toward the open ground, his weapon raised, his focus sharp. He could hear the thumping of the Alpha's massive feet behind him, the sound growing louder with every step. But Adam didn't look back. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, his mind focused on the task at hand. Just as the Alpha lunged at him, Adam sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the creature's claws. He fired another shot, hitting the creature square in the chest. The impact sent the Alpha reeling back, but it wasn't enough to take it down. The predator roared in fury, its claws swiping at the air as it advanced again. Adam gritted his teeth, knowing that he had to make every shot count. If he missed, it would be the last mistake he ever made. He steadied himself, aiming for the creature's eyes. This time, he didn't hesitate. The shot rang out, and the Alpha staggered, its massive body crashing to the ground with a deafening thud. Adam didn't waste a second. He ran toward the cubs, his heart still racing as the adrenaline surged through his veins. They were safe, for now. But the battle wasn't over. More predators would come, and Adam would be ready to face them. The galaxy had witnessed his fury, and if they wanted to keep the cubs alive, they'd soon learn that humanity was not to be underestimated. The fight had only just begun. The victory over the Alpha predator should have been a relief, but Adam knew it was only temporary. As he hurried back to the shelter, the weight of his responsibility pressed harder against his chest. The battle had only begun. The galaxy was about to witness humanity's wrath, and Adam had no idea how far it would reach. Inside the shelter, the cubs were resting, their eyes wide with both fear and curiosity. They instinctively huddled together, seeking comfort from the stranger who had risked everything to protect them. Adam didn't know how long he could keep this up. Every fight drained him, and he knew he was getting closer to his breaking point. But there was no choice, not when innocent lives were on the line. As he looked at the cubs, their innocent faces haunted him. Their world had been torn apart by the same predators who hunted them now. Adam had seen that kind of destruction before, but this time he couldn't ignore it. His hands were stained with the blood of creatures who saw themselves as predators, and humanity would do the same if forced to. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint rumble, the air vibrating with a deep, almost imperceptible hum. His instincts kicked in immediately. Something was wrong. He grabbed his weapon and darted to the nearest window, peering out into the pitch-black forest. A creeping sense of dread settled over him as he saw shapes moving in the distance, hundreds of them. The creatures weren't alone anymore. They were gathering. Adam's mind raced, calculating the odds. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, even from this far away. The galaxy was shifting. The response was immediate. The alpha creatures charged, their eyes blazing with fury. But Adam was ready. He pulled the trigger, setting off a chain of explosions, each one lighting up the sky. The ground beneath him shook with the force of the blasts. Some of the creatures were sent flying, their bodies torn apart by the sheer power of the weapons. But others kept coming. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a message. Humanity wasn't backing down, and if the galaxy wanted war, it would get one. As Adam prepared for the next wave, he knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The galaxy was watching, and if humanity survived this, they would no longer be seen as the underdog. They would be feared. But even with the odds against him, Adam stood firm, knowing that this was the moment that would change everything. The battle raged on. Adam's weapon never stopped, each shot ringing out like a promise to the creatures that they would not have humanity's submission. The alien predators swarmed from all directions, their numbers seemingly endless, but Adam's resolve was equally unyielding. He had no illusions about how dire the situation was. He was outnumbered, and the fight ahead would demand everything. The sky above them crackled with electric energy, as though the galaxy itself was responding to the chaos below. It felt as though the very stars were watching, bearing witness to humanity's defiance. Adam was fighting not just for survival, but to send a message the galaxy would never forget. Every explosion that detonated from his weapons echoed in the valley, a relentless warning. But despite the destruction, the creatures came, undeterred. Their leaders roared in rage, their eyes blazing with an almost primal fury. It was a test of wills now, and Adam wasn't sure how much longer he could keep them at bay. His body was aching from exhaustion. Blood from his earlier wounds stained his clothes, and the weight of his weapon was becoming unbearable. But the cubs were still back in the shelter, and he would not let them fall prey to these monsters. Not after all he had sacrificed. Another wave of creatures came, this time a monstrous creature charging at him with jaws snapping. It was larger than any he had faced before, a towering behemoth whose roar shook the ground beneath him. Adam's hands tightened around his weapon, his fingers bloodied from the constant firing. He aimed for the creature's chest, pulling the trigger. The blast sent it stumbling back. But it wasn't enough to bring it down. Adam was faster. Before the beast could recover, he leaped at it, dodging the creature's massive claws. In a fluid motion, he reached its underbelly and fired point-blank. The blast ripped through its thick hide, and the beast let out a deafening cry before collapsing to the ground dead. But the victory was short-lived. He heard the sounds of more creatures coming, their howls of rage filling the air. Adam quickly turned and sprinted toward the ridge, where he had set up traps earlier. It was his last hope. If he could lure them into the traps, maybe, just maybe, he could make it out alive. As he reached the ridge, Adam planted more explosives, carefully setting the detonators in place. He could hear the creatures behind him now, their massive feet pounding the earth as they charged forward. The sound of their breath, heavy and labored, was growing louder by the second. With only a few seconds to spare, Adam turned to face the oncoming storm. The creatures were almost upon him. His heart raced. There was no turning back now. "Come on," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "I'm not done yet." The first wave of creatures leaked over the ridge, and as they did, Adam hit the detonator. Explosions rocked the ground, lighting up the night sky like a series of stars falling from the heavens. The force of the blast sent creatures flying in every direction, their bodies disintegrating in the firestorm of destruction. But even as the earth trembled beneath the force of the explosions, more kept coming. Adam's heart pounded, but his eyes remained fixed on the battlefield. He couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. Humanity's fate was in his hands, and he would not let it slip away. He continued to fight with everything he had left, knowing full well that this battle would determine everything. The galaxy would remember this day. He was no longer just a soldier. He was humanity's voice, its fury, its last stand. The galaxy had chosen to wage war on them, but Adam's message was clear. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were conquering. And if the galaxy was going to break, it would break because of humanity's will. In the distance, the skies began to flash red. Reinforcements were arriving. And Adam smiled. This fight was far from over. The galaxy hadn't seen anything yet. The battle was relentless, but Adam's resolve was like iron. He had fought back wave after wave of alien attackers, and despite the odds, despite the exhaustion that threatened to take him, he stood firm. The fire in his eyes never wavered. He had started this fight to protect the innocent, to protect those alien cubs that had no place in this war. But now, it was about more than that. The explosions he had set earlier had torn through the heart of the alien assault, but they had only bought him time. The creatures that survived were regrouping, learning from their mistakes. Adam knew he didn't have much longer, but something had changed. The tide of battle had shifted. For every alien beast that fell, another seemed to take its place, but the human was no longer alone. From the corner of his vision, Adam saw a flicker of movement. He turned, weapon raised, expecting to face another enemy. But this time, it wasn't an enemy at all. The alien cubs, the ones he had risked his life for, had emerged from the shelter. The small creatures, previously huddled and scared, were now alert, their eyes wide with a strange intensity. They moved with an unexpected purpose, their small but nimble bodies darting between the ruins of the battlefield. And they weren't alone. The other creatures, once predators, once enemies, had stopped their advance. They watched the cubs with a mix of confusion and awe, their fierce aggression muted for the first time. Adam realized, in that moment, that the cubs were not just innocent creatures. They were more than that. They were a symbol of humanity's defiance, its strength, and its capacity for compassion. As if understanding the significance of the moment, the cubs began to act. They moved in unison, an almost supernatural coordination, their small forms darting through the debris, cleverly setting off a series of traps that Adam had laid earlier. The alien predators who had been hunting them now found themselves caught in their own snares. The cubs weren't just protecting themselves. They were fighting back. The attackers hesitated. They faltered. It was enough. The reinforcements that Adam had hoped for finally arrived. Human soldiers, led by a team of highly trained Earthworlders. The Earth's forces had come to answer the call. They had seen the broadcast, the messages sent out, detailing the cruelty of the aliens, the violence they had unleashed on humanity, and their disregard for innocent life. Humanity had rallied together, and now they were prepared to deliver a response the galaxy would never forget. Adam stood back, his weapon lowered. The aliens were now surrounded by both the cubs and the arriving human forces. The predators' numbers no longer seemed so endless. With the alien forces caught off guard and distracted, the humans moved in, their precision and technology overwhelming the remnants of the enemy forces. The battle, once lost, was now turning into an undeniable victory. Adam stood with his hands on his hips, his breath ragged, but his heart alight. The cubs were safe. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of, not just in strength, but in compassion. They had seen a human risk everything for those who were not his own. They had seen a species, long thought weak and insignificant, rise up to become a force no one could ignore. But the victory wasn't just about the battle won. It was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity was not to be underestimated. And as the last of the alien predators were taken into custody, Adam looked to the sky, his mind already on the next fight, on the future of the galaxy and the promise he had made to himself. No one would forget this day. The day humanity stood tall, fought for what was right, and against all odds emerged victorious. The galaxy had learned something important that day. Humanity was not just a species to survive. It was a species destined to thrive. The war was far from over, but humanity's place in the galaxy had been secured. And Adam, the one who had fought for the cubs and defied the odds, had become a symbol that would echo across the stars for centuries to come. No one would ever forget.